This is the second of a series of videos about the Enhanced Data Display, or ED. In this presentation, we will show you how to work with layers within the ED interface. ED was created as part of the National Weather Service's Weather Ready Nation pilot project based at Charleston, West Virginia. My name is Chris Leonardi, and I am one of the emergency response specialists located at Charleston. When you're talking about GIS-based systems, you'll often hear the term layer being thrown around. Well, what exactly is a layer? Well, it is a group of specific elements that have something to do with each other that can be viewed as a single data set on a map interface. Typically in the GIS world, this can be things like roads or terrain, but in weather, we can use things like radar or satellite pictures as layers, and even like something on the left, which is a collection of watches, warnings, and advisories issued by the National Weather Service. Now, the interesting thing about layers is that you can view them singly to see details of that specific element, or you can combine them with other layers to see relationships in the data. It is this kind of control over the data that gives interfaces like ED so much power. Now, before we show you how to use ED, we do have to provide this disclaimer. ED is an experimental service and is under continuous development. That means you may see bugs and data issues pop up from time to time, and the interface and available features may be changed, added to, or deleted at any time as well. If you see any interface issues, bugs, or anything else you think needs to be changed or modified, there is a feedback link in the interface that you can use. As you can imagine, there are lots of different ways to manipulate data layers within ED. Here are just some of the topics we will be covering in this video. Afterwards, go into ED and try these out for yourself. Here is the URL of the ED interface. Be sure to bookmark this in your favorite browser and visit often. There are two areas to access layers within the ED interface. First, most noticeably on the left, we have the Quick Layers section. This is a collection of the most commonly used layers, such as radar and satellite images, watch, warning, and advisory information, the gridded forecast of the Weather Service, and others. Clicking the More Layers button will bring up a tree with dozens of additional layers for you to choose from. Each of these sections has different control schemes, and we will go over them separately. So now we'll go over some of the more basic functions of the Quick Layer buttons. Some of the more advanced functions for specific layers will be left to other presentations. First, we'll start with how to turn these layers on and off. These green pluses here, when you click them, it will turn the layer on. As you can see, I just turned on the radar layer here. And then once you turn it on, it turns into a red circle with a slash through it, and clicking it again when it's that image will turn the layer off. So that is how you turn layers on and off. And of course, you can have more than one selected and have multiple layers on the screen at the same time. I just turned on the hazards layer, which is watches, warnings, and advisories. Now, next to these on-off buttons are this list box function, which chooses a specific layer in that category. So, for example, in the hazards layer, by default, you have a 5-color scheme for watches, warnings, and advisories. You can also change it to a many-color scheme, which is more detailed as to which particular type of advisory is in effect. You can also check the legend to see what these different hazards mean, and that's true for most of these layers as well. This is where the legends will pop up. So the list box will change the layer for you. So I can just look at flooding hazards, for example, fire-specific hazards, of which there are none on this map, and so forth. Now, lastly, in this section, we'll look at the opacity slider. And the opacity is basically how transparent the layer is. So when I have the slider all the way to the right, as I will for the radar now, it is its most opaque, meaning it will mostly block anything that's beneath it. If I slide it back to the left, the layer will become slowly more and more transparent, and then you can see more of the features below it. So that is the very basics of how you control layers, turning them on and off, changing specific layers, and controlling their opacity. Next, we'll look at zoom and panning functions. Now, there are a different couple ways to pan the map, the most obvious being clicking and holding the left mouse button and then dragging the mouse. This will pan the map for you. You can also use this interface in the upper left of the map interface using these arrows. For example, pushing the right-facing arrow will cause the map to pan to the east. Clicking the down arrow will cause it to pan towards the south, and so forth. Now, if you're wanting to zoom the map, there are several different ways to do that. Using the same interface, you can click on the plus arrow at the top of this bar to zoom in a stepwise manner, like this, or you can click the minus to zoom out, like so. Using the scroll wheel will do the same thing on your mouse. If you scroll up on the scroll wheel, you can see that the map will zoom in. Scrolling back will zoom out, and that's doing the same thing basically as this bar is doing. One other way to zoom is you can hold the shift key on your keyboard and then left click and drag your mouse to draw out a box you would like to zoom into. So for example, here I've got my shift key down. Now I'll click and drag the mouse and you can see this box here, and when I release all the keys, it will zoom into that area. So that is a way to zoom into a fairly precise area. One other option is to go under the Tools menu and go to the Zoom entry here, and this will bring up regions where you can zoom into, and then for each region are locations corresponding to different Weather Service offices. For example, if I wanted to zoom into, say, the Boston, Massachusetts office, I will go to Eastern Region and then select Boston, and that will bring up Boston as well as any layers that I had selected already. Now we'll look at the additional layer tree presented by the More Layers button. You can click the button to bring up the additional interface. You'll have to scroll down probably to see all of it. And you can see the additional layers are organized into folders. You can open the folder by clicking it, click it again to close it, and then select the individual layers and click them to bring them up in the interface. For example, I'll click Counties, and that will bring up a county map. I can bring up National Weather Service Office boundaries by clicking it as well. Of course, you can have more than one active at the same time. Now, if you want to control the opacity of these individual layers, the one that is selected and highlighted in blue is the one that this opacity slider will control. So right now, if I move the opacity slider, you can see the Weather Service Office boundaries are the ones that fade in and out because that's the one I have selected. If I wanted to control the county map and control its opacity, I would have to select it, and then you can see that that opacity is being controlled. If you have multiple layers selected and you want to clear all the additional layers presented in the More Layers tree, you can click this broom and it will clear them off the display. It will not clear off any of the quick layers, only the ones in this interface. Now there might be a layer in this tree that you are aware of, but you cannot remember its name or its location in the tree, and that's where this filter function could come in, and it will allow you to find any layer based on a keyword. For example, if I want to find something related to hurricanes, I can type the word hurricane in here, and it will bring up all the layers that have something to do with hurricanes, and then I can select them as normal. For example, if I want to see hurricane evacuation routes near the coast, I can select that and pan towards the coast, and here are the hurricane evacuation routes. So this More Layers tree is definitely something worth looking out for and exploring, as it controls many additional layers with lots of good information available through the EDD interface. Now suppose you have a situation like this. I have two different layers displayed here. The one with greens is a precipitation forecast layer, and the one with tans, yellows, and reds is a drought index forecast layer. And you can see that the drought layer is currently laid on top of the precipitation layer, both up here and down here. Now, what if I want to change the stacking order of layers such that the precipitation map is on top instead of the drought index? Well, I can do that through the Tools menu if I select the Change Layer Order selection, and it will bring up this small window. And this is where I can change the order of the layers. Notice that the drought is on top of the list, meaning it is on top of the stack of layers currently on the display. Now, if I wanted to put this, which is the precipitation map, on top, what I can do is click and hold it and drag it to the top of the list, and that will place it on top of the stack such that the precipitation is now in front of the drought map. So this is how you can change the order of layers that you currently have on the display. Notice in this list too, the latitude-longitude lines are a layer for the purposes of this display, and you can see them now above the precip layer. And also the small red search marker that you might see if you use the search box, that is also a layer, and that will show up on top if you so choose as well. Now the radar displayed using quick layers is a little special, and it needs these buttons here. If it shows up in the list here, you can move the radar up and down on the layer order by clicking these buttons here. So this is the way you can control the stacking order of layers on the display to get them the way that you want to display them. Our final topic will be user profiles. One thing to notice, this version of ED is now 2.2. Obviously I recorded this segment after the others. Just goes to show you how quickly ED is evolving. Now suppose you have this situation where you have the radar and observations laid out the way you like, and also the map is panned and zoomed to a nice location. Now you want to save this for future use, so you don't have to select these options every time. You can use profiles. If I go into the Tools menu and select Configure Profiles, clicking it will bring up this window here. Now if I want to save what I currently have on the screen with the layers and the map and save it as a profile, all I have to do is click on the profile name box here and put in a unique name. For example, I'll put in radar. And then if I click the Save button, it will add it to this list of profiles. Now to cycle through the profiles, I can click this Auto Update to Selected Profile box here. And now I can start clicking the names that will change between the different profiles. For example, here's a profile I set up before called Alaska. If I click on it, it will zoom to Alaska and bring up certain products. In this case, I selected Satellite, the Hazards layer, and Observations. And it will load those layers for me. Clicking Radar will bring back that radar profile that I just created, along with the zoom, observations, and all the other options I like. Now default is a special profile. Default is the one that comes up when you first start up ED, as it says down here. And right now the default is simply a zoomed out map with no layers selected. I can save over the default profile using whatever options I like, and then that profile will come up every time I start ED. That could be very useful to zoom it into your location, for example. Now, I can also simply delete profiles very simply. Say I don't want the Alaska profile anymore, all I have to do is click delete, and it's gone. If I want to delete all the profiles and start over, I can click the reset button, and that will clear out the list and bring back the default profile that first came with ED, which is this zoomed out map. I'll just say no here, but saying yes would completely delete all your profiles. So this is the way you can use profiles in your setup, and it's a very nice way to save layers and options the way you want and be able to call them up in the future. These are saved as a file on your browser and should be there every time you start up ED. Thank you for viewing this presentation on the Enhanced Data Display. We hope that you find this service useful and enjoyable. Be sure to look for additional presentations in the same location you found this one. Remember, the URL for ED is preview.weather.gov/ed. To leave us feedback, use the feedback function in ED or post a comment on the Enhanced Data Display page on Facebook.